Hello everyone, and welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Douglas Johnson. I am a yoga, meditation, and non-dual teacher. I'm an ordained minister and a certified Kilobi inquiries facilitator. Today I wanted to talk about a question that comes up quite a bit, especially with people who are using inquiry to heal trauma and repressed emotions and to deal with their past, you might say. In reality, in non-dual realization, we really realize that there is no past, there's no future, there's really only what we could call the present, which might not be what we really tend to think of it when we think of past and future. There really is just this, whatever this is. The human mind can create a conception about future, past, a narrative, present, but that's not really actually what's going on here. But regardless, many people will experience life as though there is a future, there's a past, there's a present, and many people feel that their past is causing them suffering in the present. It's not really possible. Only what's happening in the present can cause suffering in the present. But this is a realization that needs to be realized by the individual. Me telling you that will not really help you. It's a pointer, and it hopefully will spark curiosity, and then you might start to investigate and look deeper into your experience and realize what I'm saying is the truth. But this is a truth that needs to be experienced for oneself, not taken on faith or believed because a teacher or a book says it to be so. So many people who especially are doing inquiry, but even spiritual seekers, people who are trying to be fully enlightened or fully embodied, can come up with this question. And the question is, when am I done? When am I finished? When can I stop doing this? When can I stop inquiry? When can I stop investigating my experience? When am I the Zen master or the guru and I can just sit on a throne or sit in a cross-legged position and have students come to me and ask me questions and just give them these wise answers? When do I get to be that? Or again, if people are dealing with chronic pain, trauma, repression, and they're using inquiry to try and heal those things, which many people are, then the question is, when am I done? When am I going to be fully healed? When can I stop? How long will this take? Those sorts of questions. So what I'd like to propose to you today is that is the wrong question to ask. It is telling us immediately that the individual, again, is caught in past and future, which is ultimately going to be problematic. We need to get out of that type of thinking. And it also shows an identification. And so I want to share a personal experience today that I went through recently. And I share this not looking for sympathy. I'm not someone who personally, I'm a rather private individual. So I don't really get a lot from getting on social media or getting in front of a class and bearing my heart out in front of everybody and, showing how vulnerable I can be. I don't really need to do that. I don't need the validation. I don't need the reassurance. I don't really need anything from a group of people, even my own students, even people who love me. I can keep my own counsel, and I have the tools because I've been doing this work for so long, I have the tools to process my experiences, my feelings. It can be nice with somebody who you feel a real connection with to share, and you might gain some insight from that. But for me, that's very different than sharing in a sort of public forum, sharing on YouTube or sharing on Patreon or sharing on Facebook and just putting it out there for the world. That to me just feels very different. The type of responses and feedback you're likely to get are very different. But I will share today a personal experience because my hope is that it will be of value to you, that you might learn something from this, and it might help you with this question of when am I done? When am I through? When can I stop? Okay? So this experience was one I had recently, and I actually posted a little essay, if you will, a blog post on Christmas on Patreon, and you can please check that out if you haven't been over there. I post additional material that I can't post on YouTube. There are public streaming classes on there. There are recorded yoga classes on there. There's also, again, written material and things that I share from other creators that I post on there. So those are all things that are difficult or I can't share on YouTube. So it's a real resource, and I hope you will check it out. And the other side of it is there's an opportunity for you to support me in this teaching if you're getting value from it. Everything there should be open and free to the public, but it is an opportunity, if you choose to, you can support the work that I do. So I posted this essay, if you will, this blog post called A Tale of True Forgiveness, and it was on Christmas, and I thought it was the timing was good because I think Jesus in the Christian tradition talks quite a bit about the importance of forgiveness, and certainly A Course in Miracles, which is a teaching from that tradition, talks a lot about forgiveness. So in this blog post, I share, again, a personal experience of somebody who I went through an experience with where I ended up having a lot of emotional energy toward this person that I had to process using inquiry. And after that experience happened, after I wrote that blog post, the question came up for me is, where did all of this emotional energy come from? Okay, so there are two possible answers for us. One is it came from the past, and this is what we would call a trigger. So a trigger is, let's say I had a very difficult relationship with my mother, and I have a lot of emotional energy directed at her and her behavior and the way that she was toward me. And I haven't processed any of that. It's all still in there. I'm probably not aware of it because, again, we're talking about the unconscious, right? So we're not talking about things that we're personally going to be aware of. These are things that are hidden in the body, and we need to do some sort of somatic processing really to access and alleviate these things. And most people don't know how to do that. They don't know they need to do it. And even if they do, they don't care to do it because it's not the easiest thing to do. So as long as they're relatively healthy and relatively happy, most people are going to skip doing that kind of work. So somebody, maybe my partner or somebody else, I have a maybe similar dynamic or relationship as I do to my mother, and they say something, or I'm put in a situation that reminds me of a situation with my mother, and all that energy that is really directed at my mother actually comes up and is directed at this individual. Okay, so that's one source of energy. Now for me, that wasn't where this energy came from. This energy was actually repressed in the relationship that I was writing about. So this wasn't past trauma and past energy that was being triggered. Rather, this was emotions and feelings that had been created recently. Okay, so that's what makes this really interesting, I think. So, a trigger is a situation that's going to pull up energy that is unprocessed from, again, the past, which doesn't really exist, not in the way that we conceive of it. So it actually isn't energy that is directed at the individual we're dealing with. It's actually energy that was not allowed or is relevant to a different individual, different person. And we're not really in the present. We're not actually dealing with the present situation. We're triggered. Now, what happened with me, which was interesting, was I learned that I had certain codependent tendencies that were created from situations I dealt with in my youth that were quite abusive and difficult. And so that was the way that I had learned to cope with or deal with the situation that I was in. And what's interesting for me is when I started doing inquiry and we started looking into the past, we didn't really find energy on the past. We didn't find a lot of triggers. We didn't find a lot of this residual leftover energy animating things in my experience. When we would, like my teacher likes to say, Scott, my inquiry teacher, he says, poke the bear. So when we would poke the bear wouldn't stir. There wasn't a bear. There wasn't a lot of energy there. So that was when I started doing inquiry. What was interesting about this experience for me is when I went through this experience and this individual interacting with this individual, and I had all this energy come up, I was like, wow, where did that come from? And what I realized is that even though I had cleared out the energy from the past, I had certain programs, certain conditioning that was, you could say, latent, that it was sitting there just waiting for the right opportunity to kick back online and to start again repressing emotion and repressing desires and repressing boundary setting, things like that, which are all things that we shouldn't do in our relationships. Again, many of us had to survive. That was how we survived our family of origin. A lot of us grew up in situations that maybe on the surface it looked healthy and it seemed fine, but actually if we were to dig, we'd find that there was a lot of covert things going on in terms of the way parents were relating to us, we were relating with our parents and siblings, our teachers, all kinds of things. So as children, we learn to cope with these things. We are inherently egoic, so we see everything as our fault, and we are, in a sense, helpless to a greater or lesser degree, depending on our age. And so we know we need the approval and love and support of those around us. So we can come up with very, very unhealthy strategies for navigating that landscape, and many of us do, whether we realize it or not. And so this can create this kind of conditioning or program that I'm speaking about. So that was true of me as well as it is anyone else. And what was interesting about my experience is when I started doing inquiry, because I had done so much spiritual work and processing, meditation, yoga nidra, yoga asanas, different kinds of inquiry. I didn't have Kiloby inquiry when I was doing that work, but if I did, it would have been great. It probably would have made my work much easier and quicker, but I just didn't have it as a tool. Now I do, and I have used it in this instance. So I spent several days processing the emotions of that experience. And like I share in the blog post, before I processed the emotions, I could not get out of a very painful egoic perspective. Okay, and that was the main thing I was hoping to share in that blog post, is that if you have unprocessed emotions, you will not be able to let go of this painful egoic perspective. So if you find that's the case for you, if you find there's someone in your life who you just can't forgive, and I mean really forgive in your heart and gut, that doesn't mean condone. I always need to say that, because people think that, well, if I forgive this person, then I'm condoning their behavior, or I'm saying that what they did didn't matter. No, that's not at all what you're saying. You're forgiving for you. It's so you can be free, so you can be happy. And again, if you don't, that doesn't make sense, that's fine. Hopefully one day it will, because it's a very important part of the process. So what happened with me was that this old, let's say, psychological machinery or conditioning of how to survive basically kicked back on. It was dormant. I had learned to avoid certain dysfunctional relationships and certain personality types where it was too similar to the people that I grew up with in my family of origin. So I just instinctively would stay away from those types of people, those types of relationships. And I did a good job of it. I've lived on this planet many, many years, and because I grew up with narcissism and personality disorder, I basically knew what that looked like, and I was able to steer clear of it and other forms of dysfunction. But more recently, I invited someone in who I had more of a dysfunctional relationship with. And what was interesting for me is that old conditioning and machinery kicked right back in. And what it was designed to do, again, was to repress emotion, to repress desire, to repress, again, my boundaries. And this individual was very good at treating me much the way that I was used to being treated in my family of origin. Now, I want to be very clear. I'm not pointing the finger at anybody or blaming anybody. It always takes two to tango. And I'm very grateful to this individual for doing that, because it brought awareness. And this, for me, this life, all of this is about awareness. It really is about learning about ourselves and seeing ourselves fully. And so I find that that's difficult or impossible without relationship. If you're sitting by yourself in a cave meditating, that's one kind of experience, okay? And to be able to be blissful and calm and peaceful in that situation, that's one thing. there are many stories in the yoga tradition of yogis doing that and then getting off their cushion, leaving the cave in the mountain and coming down to the marketplace and acting like everybody else. Because as long as they were by themselves or in a cloistered environment, sure, if I control my environment, then I can control my feelings. What happens when I can't control my environment? Now, many spiritual people will say, well, I don't like the marketplace. I don't like discotheques. I don't like Walmart and Target and online, Facebook and all these things that might trigger us. They will claim to be above that, beyond it. And I get it. I mean, honestly, that's how I feel about a lot of things. But we need to be really careful about things that we're avoidant to, right? And we need to be realistic about, if I live in a very controlled, cloistered environment, that is not a good measure of whether or not I've actually handled or dealt with my triggers and whether or not I can handle, say, difficult relationships and difficult people. So what was interesting about my experience and my story is, at least from what we could tell by using inquiry and poking the bear, in my instance, there was very little to no repressed energy there from the past. Even though I had quite a difficult, abusive childhood, I had processed that energy. What's interesting about this story is, because the machinery of repression was still there in place, I started repressing once the situation was appropriate. And this is why the question of when am I done, when am I finished, is really the wrong question to ask. We could have said, hey, Doug, you don't have any repression. You've dealt with all this stuff. You're finished. You're done. But what you see in this instance is we can't see what we can't see. We can't know what we can't know. That's why it's called the unconscious. We don't know what's in there. We don't know what machinery might be still running in the background, or again, in my case, dormant. It would only kick on when I was in a certain kind of relationship, and I just had never been in that kind of relationship in my lifetime. So asking the question, when am I done with inquiry? When am I done with spirituality? When am I finished? Is a little bit like saying, when am I done eating? Right? Okay, I've ate some healthy food. Am I done now? Well, you can be done temporarily, but you're going to need to eat again, right? And again, if you're like, well, okay, I ate healthy, and so now I want to go back to eating McDonald's because I like that. Am I done yet eating healthy? No, you pretty much need to continue that work for the rest of your life if you want to remain healthy. A similar analogy is with medicine, right? When can I fire my doctor for good? You can't. You never know when something will happen in life where you may have been healed and whole, and then something comes along and you begin repressing again. You begin picking up unhealthy habits. And for me, it was a combination of dealing with compulsive disorders in this personality, which I hadn't dealt with before, but I learned that is something that many people who may have started healthy, they end up becoming codependent. And so that's exactly what I was dealing with. And then also, again, my childhood, there was a certain resonance there with this individual in my present experience who, again, it was very easy for me to go back into old familiar patterns with this individual because of the way that I was raised and abused and all of that. So my point is that asking, when am I done, when am I finished, is really the wrong question to ask. What you really want to look at is, do I know how to process my experience in real time? Do I know how to process the past so I can deal with any trauma or repression from the past that might cause suffering, psychological suffering? It might also cause physical and mental and emotional illness in the present moment. Like, very real conditions are caused by, again, what we conceive of as the past. Okay, so do I know how to handle that? Do I know how to deal with that? It could be on your own, or it could be with a community or a teacher. However, it's just, but do you know how to handle that? Have you handled that? Okay, that's one big question we want to ask, not when am I done? Okay, do I know how to process and handle that? If I haven't processed and handled that, then I'm definitely not done, because those things from the past, which doesn't really exist, but those things that I conceive of as the past, they are going to influence my actions in the present, which will affect what I view as the future. Okay, so very, very important. If you want your future to be different than your present or your past, then you have to process what came from the past. Okay, so that's one question we need to ask ourselves. Do I know how to do that? Do I have the skill set and the tools to do that? And there may be many, many ways of doing that. The one that I think is most effective is going to be inquiry. Okay, and again, you can book inquiry sessions with me if you're interested. There's also material online and books that Scott has written. So it's something that you can do, but you want to be really, really realistic about it. Most people do need to work one-on-one, at least at the beginning, with somebody. So maybe you're super talented and you just figure it all out on your own. That's great. But for most people, that's not the case. Again, we hear stories of amazing musicians who, first time they pick up the guitar, it's like almost as though they were born knowing how to play, right? That's nice. Most of us, that's not the case. So usually we shouldn't assume that we are the exception to the rule in that regard. We should wait for a teacher or someone we respect to say that to us, rather than just assuming that's the case. Okay, the next question you want to ask, instead of when am I done, when am I finished, is, do I know how to process what's going on in the present? Am I processing what may come up in the present moment? Because most of us, I think, will find that there will still be situations and things where the old programming, again, can kick in. And a very good sign of this is, again, psychological suffering. This is something I always invite students to look at. Oftentimes, students want to blame their partner. They want to blame their job. They want to blame society. But if we really want power, and we do want power in this work, we have to say to ourselves that we are going to take full responsibility for our peace and happiness. We're not going to blame anyone else for it. This isn't to say that others don't play a role. But again, the deepest non-dual realization is there is no others. There are no others. There's no one else to blame but ourselves when we really understand what the self is, okay? So if I'm blaming others, that already is telling me that I'm in a limited egoic perspective. I'm not actually seeing truth, okay? So again, if you're not there, you're not there, and that's okay. That means that there's more processing that needs to happen, because again, when we process this stuff, very often perspective shifts automatically. We don't have to try and force ourselves to forgive another. We automatically see our part in it, and that's exactly what happened to me. At first, I just felt a lot of anger and rage. There was a lot of pain there, and I was blaming this individual for that. Once I processed those feelings, boom, it happened immediately. I saw my role and my part in what was going on, which was very important, because that means I have power to control the future. If it was really the other person's fault, then I don't have any control, right? Someone can just drop into my life at any time and start making me suffer. But when I realize the part that I'm playing in the dance, then I have control, I have power, I can shape, again, how things unfold, okay? So very, very important. So those two questions, have I processed the past, at least what I'm aware of? Again, there might be pockets of programming, things that we're not aware of, repressed emotion we're not aware of. To the best of our ability, have we pulled up and processed the past? Because that's going to free us. And then the second question is, am I processing in real time? Again, it's a really dangerous thing to think you're finished. What a individual in the inquiry group named Toshi, he likes to really talk about not landing. We don't want to land. We don't want to say, oh, I'm done, I'm finished, I'm clear, I don't have any more work to do, I'm completely conscious or aware, because again, that might even be true at one moment, at a certain stage, at a certain point, and then we might find that that stops being true. We might have processed the past, but then find that, oh, in the present moment, I'm actually starting to repress certain emotions or certain feelings in this relationship, okay? And again, very often these are intimate relationships. These are relationships with people that we love, we have a lot of personal investment in. That's very often where we'll find the really, really juicy stuff. So those are two questions I'll invite you to ask yourself, even if you've never asked the question, when am I done? And again, it's really about process. I process the past until I find that there's nothing left to process there. Again, most people don't even know how to do that. They don't know how to pull up the past. They don't know what that means. So learning that, and again, this is something I can teach you, but it's something I teach one-on-one. I teach yoga in groups. I can do yoga nidra in groups. I can teach you meditation in a group setting, but inquiry is something that we really need to do one-on-one. So that is something that you will need to invest the time and energy and financial resources to learn, but it's one of the most important things. Is it the only way to clear the past? No. Again, I didn't have that tool, but having learned it, I think it is the best tool for doing that. It's the most efficient and reliable way. Then once you've handled your past, the question becomes, again, am I processing the present? If something comes up, do I know how to recognize that something is up and process that and see that? And again, like with me, I didn't see it right away. And so a fair amount of energy had been repressed and had to be processed afterwards. But thankfully, these tools work. And so I was able to process that. And it's been an amazing experience. The last few months, there's been a lot of self-awareness and growth for me. And so again, I'm very grateful to the individual who helped spark all of that. There's no sense of blaming or anger or that that individual did anything wrong. They were simply being themselves. And they just, the way they were, fit like a puzzle piece with my own psyche to activate that old programming to start repressing my own needs, desires, boundaries, whatnot, to sacrifice myself. And again, this is something that many codependent people do. So that's something that I've learned a lot more about, because I realized that that's something that I had a tendency to do. And with that awareness, with that education, I have all intention of moving forward and being aware of that and processing, if those programs come back online, actually dealing with them and seeing them, right? Because a lot of times when it comes to repression and these types of programs, we just don't see them. They're designed to stay hidden. So it can be very, very tricky. And that's where having a spiritual community, having a spiritual teacher, somebody who is like another set of eyes, because very often we just will not be able to see it or understand. And someone who has a little bit of distance may be able to help us with that. All right, everyone, I hope you found this helpful. As always, thank you to my patrons on Patreon. If you'd like to become one of those, please check out the links below. And if you just got something from this video and you'd like to contribute, please check out the links. You can make a one-time contribution, and that really does help me out. Also, if you're on YouTube, just liking the video, subscribing, leaving a comment can be really, really helpful in spreading this video further using the algorithm, so more people will get to see it and hopefully it will help them. As always, if you have any questions or you'd like to work with me one-on-one, this is really, at this stage, I realize this is the end of the spiritual and yogic path. We will likely need to work one-on-one with some teacher. So it doesn't need to be me, but somebody. It could even be your psychologist, psychiatrist, if they know what they're doing and there is a spiritual elements to what they do. I feel like many psychologists and psychiatrists are beginning to bring in more spiritual elements into their work. So again, there are various forms this can take, but this is a very important stage, I think, for anyone who's on the path. All right, everyone, until next time, namaste, and have a beautiful day.